Good evening. There's no point in introducing myself. It was said so eloquently. Clive Rohald, Creative Director at Profit. And I am more than enormously proud to be here this evening to share with you some thoughts and thinking around this concept of VUCA, which we're going to get into a little bit later. But on a very personal level, it's truly incredible to be part of such an iconic event. The first creativity season brought to you by the King Abdulaziz Center for World Culture, ITHRA. Enrichment is at its heart. And it's even more incredible to be standing out on this stage in such an iconic building, thinking about and talking about this idea of disruption. Because I'm a very, very big believer that not only are we standing and seated and sharing in this venue, an iconic building that fundamentally changed the landscape, the architectural landscape of the region. It is an incredible building. But what I find really, really interesting is that at its heart, in its essence, this idea of enrichment, we are standing in a building today celebrating the creativity season with a theme of disruption, and at its very, very heart, I believe that disruption in this context is fundamentally changing the cultural landscape in itself. So very apt that the theme for this year's creativity season is disruption, and I hope to share with you some really interesting thoughts around disruption itself. You're probably all wondering what my personal goldfish is doing on the screen behind me, and let me just introduce you to James. James is actually my goldfish. I videoed him about 2 months ago when I was very first asked to do the talk around this theme of disruption. And one of the big, big challenges for any of you that may or may not have been asked to do a talk is to think about, what am I going to talk about? Am I going to introduce humor? It may work, it may fail. What is going to engage the audience? What's going to excite? What's going to be really relevant? And I was having some sleepless nights thinking about what I was going to talk about in the context of this year's theme, disruption, and went downstairs very late at night and I was looking at James in his goldfish bowl, and I thought to myself, wow, imagine if James could live outside of his bowl. Imagine if we could disrupt this perfect world that he lives in. He lives in a beautiful home, oxygen, food, fed, looked after, light, water. Now, most people would say to me, well, it's a ridiculous thought because a fish can't live out of water. The fish would die. But since we are talking about creativity, I would urge all of you to think outside the box for the next 15 minutes, to use our imagination, to imagine that if James could live outside that perfect world, if we could disrupt his world, as I believe we should be disrupting our own world in our comfort zone, he may see the world in a very, very different way. And if he was able to do that, I started to think about what would the world look like if we could condense the world into 2 minutes, a visual narrative of what the world would look like from a different perspective and a different viewpoint. And this is what I think he may have experienced or seen. I think that we could all agree that it's a pretty disruptive world we live in. And yet, through this disruption are real moments of beauty and magic, of innovation, of positive impact. And what James actually saw was a world, a condensed world in 2 minutes, and he came to this realization out of the blue that actually what he had entered was a world that balanced disruption and beauty, positive impact and negativity, disruption and transformation. And the reality is that what he actually realized is that he'd entered this world of VUCA. I'm sure many of you are wondering, what is VUCA? In fact, how many of you have even heard the phrase VUCA? We have 3. Not many. And what is even more interesting is when I asked people in London what the word VUCA suggested to them or what it meant, most people said to me, it was quite interesting, it sounded like some kind of voodoo or tribal magic. Yeah, an African mask. It's got that kind of tone to it. Other people that I spoke to said to me it sounded like some kind of medication. It's also got that kind of tone, some kind of pill that one might take. And we also have a product, I don't know if you have it here in the kingdom, called Bazooka Your Veruca, which is a wart medicine. And a lot of people said to me that was actually, that kind of ointment or cream. But in fact, there were 185,542,682 searches online on digital channels last year alone for the term VUCA. That actually equates to, I think it's 1 in 40 in terms of people. That's 2.5% of the world's population. And what VUCA really stands for is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. It was a phrase coined by the military to describe a state after a conflict. And the reality is that after a conflict, there is never, ever a peaceful solution. There is never, ever 100% certainty. In fact, more often than not, when there is conflict or when there is disruption, there is always a sense of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. It's a really interesting thought. It's a really scary thought. And we live in a world today, if one thinks about the rapid technological change, the tools at our disposal, a very volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. And yet we as creatives have the power and the imagination to turn this into something great. Who would have thought that out of this world of disruption, out of this uncertainty and volatility, greatness can really be achieved? Each and every one of us has the power to achieve greatness in some shape or another. I'm also a firm believer, being a designer and working in the creative industries, that great ideas never happen at the switch of a light bulb. We all tend to say, let's get into a room, let's do a workshop, a brainstorm session. I'm a big believer that brainstorm sessions very rarely yield incredible results. What really does yield incredible results are when we define experiences based on things that sometimes we're not even aware of. Personal experiences, emotional experiences. How many of you know, or if I had to ask you what this stands for, most of you would say it's 135 before Christ. In fact, out of this disruption, we have witnessed, without even knowing, some of the greatest innovations in the world today, things that have fundamentally changed our lives. The 135 BC is actually the Holger 135 BCs. And how many of you know what the Holger 135 BC is? Anybody? I'm sure most of you use it every single day. We have one person who knows what that is. In fact, it's an incredible, incredible story. The Holger 135 BC was the very camera used by Kevin Systrom when Instagram was invented. And how many of you know the story of Instagram? We take it for granted. We use it every day. And I think it's a really great example of something that was born out of a very different kind of disruption, because disruption takes many, many, many different forms. So the story was Kevin Systrom was with his girlfriend and decided to do a photography course in Venice, and went in with a fantastic brand new SLR camera. His teacher told him, absolutely not, and gave him this particular camera, the Holger 135. And as the film was processed, he noticed, because of faults on the camera, that there were different lighting effects on the prints. Fast forward 6 years, Facebook had actually come into its fore, and his girlfriend started posting images on Facebook. She was a little bit embarrassed because she felt that she couldn't compete with the quality of other people's photographs. And at that very moment, Kevin Systrom remembered what had happened when he had done the photography course, and the very next day the first Instagram filter was produced, and I believe it was December 2010, Instagram was launched, and in 1 month that of a million followers. So out of something very personal, very emotional, something that was actually a little bit broken, came an incredible invention. Who knows what 10-4 affirmative is? Anybody? That's code. I don't know if any of you used to play when you were kids on what we used to call them CBs, radio scanners. Jack Dorsey, a young kid born in St. Louis in America, came from a rather underprivileged family, was self-schooled, and suffered severely from a stutter, to the extent he had no friends at school, and he was shunned by society. So what he used to do was stay at home and play on his parents' radio. And he was absolutely amazed, listening to police scanning, different codes being sent to truckers across America, that people were able to communicate in short bursts of information. Twitter was born. Another great example of how somebody leveraged something very personal in their lives, something very challenging, and turned it into something really positive. These are just two examples that leverage what I think of disruption in very, very different contexts, in different ways, that have had remarkable impact in our world today. And we have a privilege as creatives in the industry to see the world in different ways, to perceive things in different ways, to truly transform negativity into positivity. So, as creatives, we also have the ability to break things down, to transform them, to mix them up. What if we turned VUCA on its head and decided that VUCA should stand for something very different? VUCA actually stand for vision, understanding, curiosity, and authenticity. And if we think about it in a different context and we think about the framework differently, it has fundamentally different implications. The future simply isn't what it used to be. And if anybody tells you that they can predict the future, they're talking nonsense. Nobody can predict the future. What we can do is we can be much more aware of the environment around us. We can be much more attuned to the pressures around us and translate those into something positive. And there are great disruptors and innovators in the world today. Vision, His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Whether we agree or disagree, at his core, the DNA is this essence of vision. Nelson Mandela, I think, absolutely typifies understanding. He leveraged emotion, he united a nation, he dispelled apartheid. Pablo Picasso, one of the great masters of the 20th century, Cubism was born, curiosity, and he actually said that it was only through disruption and breaking something down that he could truly create. And the late Zaha Hadid truly represents the idea of authenticity. For those of you who don't know, she was a fine artist, and she was told she would never, ever make a bridge to architecture. And what is so fascinating is that her architecture is actually a translation of her painterly techniques. Truly iconic, truly emotive, and truly authentic to her belief. But the sum of all of this, what is the real core that unites all of this? That unites vision, understanding, curiosity, and authenticity. For all of us here this evening, it's really about creativity. And that is really something unique in each and every one of us, and one of the powers we have being creatives in the world today. Which really leads me to another thought. Many people talk about branding, I come from a brand background, as having started with product. The first age of branding was product. If any of you remember the Olivetti typewriter, it was purely functional. We then moved into image. If you think about the beautiful travel posters from the 1930s and 1940s, illustrations of these wonderful aircraft with limousines, really building up the whole Hollywood era. And everybody talks today about this idea of experience. We live in the age of experience. Yes, we do. But I believe that we live in a very, very different kind of experience age. And I hypothesize that actually we are now in the fourth age of brand. The age of disruption, positive disruption. And what do I mean by this? I'm going to share with you a recent advertisement, a campaign by IKEA that I think really leverages technology in a very interesting way. It has disrupted traditional advertising, and it also disrupts the traditional way in which product is sold. It taps into something super, super personal. It references a place of sanctity. It goes into our home and references the bedroom. And I think it's really, really interesting that they don't even talk about or showcase product. What they did in this campaign, and this was launched in March, is they blended technology with emotion and created something super personal and very, very hyper-relevant. This idea of hyper-relevance is incredibly important when one thinks about this age of positive disruption, because it's all about the individual. I think what's really, really remarkable about this is that it taps into human personal emotion. It is an example of what I call this fourth age of branding, positive disruption. It challenges traditional perceptions. It blends technology and emotion and does it in a way that basically doesn't show product, but it's designed for the individual to inspire hearts and to engage minds. Everybody talks today about, oh, what's the big idea? Certainly in the creative industries, we all go into these rooms and say, well, what's the big idea? It's no longer about the big idea. I think in today's world, it's more about what is relevant, and it is more about what is personalized. This idea of creating hyper-personalized experiences. I think big ideas were made for a mass audience, but simple, rich, immersive, hyper-personalized ideas are made for the individual. And that is the way we need to think about brands in the world today and about experiences that we create, particularly in this world of disruptive technology and rapid change. It has to be about the individual if we're going to really make change. So one of the advantages we have, and I guess some of the leaving thoughts that I'd like to leave you with this evening, is that we as creatives have a unique ability to not only challenge a status quo, but to view the world through a different lens, to view the world through a disruptive lens. And in doing so, we can achieve greatness. And I would urge each and every one of us, in our own individual way, that when we are presented with a problem, when we are presented with something that is disruptive, to challenge it, to actually embrace it. Because if we can embrace challenge and we can embrace disruption, true greatness can happen. And with that, I'd like to say thank you. I hope you found it interesting. I think that we in the creative industry are living at a time like no other. We have an amazing opportunity to leverage new tools at our disposal and to create truly memorable experiences that not only disrupt, but that create positive impact and touch human emotion. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you for disrupting our lens and making us more aware as we go and into with this evening. Questions? Let's see.
We have one.
I think
lady
that,
over here.
yes, please. If we can have a microphone to the 4th or 5th row. Thank you.
Hello. I wanted to ask, since we live normal daily lives, and we get into routine, and we don't realize that. And then when we have a problem, or we're designing for something, and we want to think creatively, but unconsciously we're used to the routine, we're used to our daily lives. How can we get out of this routine and go out of the box and think creatively without, get into the normal routine?
Good question. And we are, on the one hand, we all work in environments and there's commercial pressures and there's time frames, etc. And I always think, well, how do you balance commerciality with creativity? Right? Because creativity, as I said, great moments don't just happen at the flick of a light bulb. What I tend to do in our studio in London is send people out. Get them out of the natural environment that they sit in behind the desk computers the whole day, go and see an exhibition. Go and sit in a different environment. Go and sketch outside in the park. I think it's it sounds a bit cliched, but it doesn't take much to change where you sit, where you move, how you think. And as I said at the very, very beginning, James really was the inspiration for this. I was really kind of racking my brain about what I was going to talk about, and it was just that moment of contemplation, sitting in a different environment, looking at something familiar, that a thought actually emerged. So that is really what I would urge you to do. Try and get out of the routine, the 9 to 5 routine. Certainly in London it's 9 to 11. Sitting at the desk, straight in the computers. Go out. Do something different. Disrupt your daily routine, and great things will happen. And memories and ideas will actually be generated. I also think that sometimes one should look inward to challenges that we are faced with each and every day, because that is when you start thinking about creating experiences that are going to be truly relevant.
Thank you. I see a show of hands just at the center. Yes. If we can help one another to pass that microphone. Thank you.
Hello there, my name is Maria Fernanda, but you can just call me Mafer. Well, my question is
Hi,
that,
Mafer.
do you think technology has disrupted our creativity?
There's no doubt about it. I think that there is enormous pressure on the creative industry to leverage technology in far more innovative and creative ways. Something that we were thinking about, and it's actually something that we are moving towards, certainly in our studio, is designers have a traditional toolbox, or had a traditional toolbox of tools to work with: color, form, shape, typography, photography. But if we're going to create truly personalized, relevant experiences, we need to be far more adaptive. And by adaptive, I mean much more agile. There's this whole philosophy we've been developing around living brands. The traditional notion of a brand being something static is no longer relevant. Brands need to adapt and respond in real time to what we need. When you think about Uber does a great job of that. So I think we need to start thinking about how we use data, the value of algorithms, to create experiences and brands. And the reality is the brand is no longer a logo. A brand is about the experience and interaction I have with a person, a product, an institution. So we've got to start thinking far more on a macro level and start leveraging some of these new technology tools that are there for us to use. Don't be afraid of them. Make them work within the context of problems you're trying to solve. And whilst color, form, shape, typography, photography will always be important tools, we are privileged that with the technological revolution, there are all these additional incredible tools at our advantage and at our fingertips that we simply need to embrace and build into the crafting of these hyper-relevant experiences.
I think it's just that we need to make a balance with technology and traditional marketing, because then we'll be able to be creative and get help from the new technology.
I think that's a fair statement, and I also think we need to be cognizant of the fact that not all markets and not all cultures and not all clients embrace technology in the same way. So the idea of a balance is a really, really good analogy and way of thinking about it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm assessing whether we have more time for another question, but it does not seem so. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you can have your way there. Thank you.